But there was more than one kind of empire. The British arrived on foreign soil not only as traders or rulers, but as settlers, determined to make a new and permanent home for themselves in the empire. They found plenty of thinly populated, if inhospitable, places in which to do it. In 1831, a young Scottish lawyer was travelling across the wild and snowy lands of British Canada. His name was Adam Ferguson. He'd come all the way from Perthshire to look for a suitable spot to build a new town for Scottish emigrants. Adam Ferguson was just one of vast numbers of British people who saw the empire as an opportunity to make something of themselves. Throughout the 19th and well into the 20th century, millions upon millions of British people left home for somewhere in the empire. There can hardly have been a family in the land who hadn't said goodbye to somebody. The Scots in particular left their homeland in vast numbers. They would play a huge role in the building of empire, not only as settlers, but as soldiers, missionaries, engineers, and pioneers. Ferguson and his companions eventually found a site in a sheltered valley 60 miles from what is now Toronto. There was water to power a mill and wood and stone for building in a harsh climate. It was tough going at first. They built themselves log cabins like this. They survived on whatever bears or deer they could kill, and in winter it was so cold that the wheat froze, which made the scones pretty chewy. In only a few years, a handful of huts had become a thriving little town. Modestly, Ferguson named his new town after himself, Fergus. Settlements like Fergus sprang up all over the empire, from Canada to Australia. The settlers built in the style they knew, from the houses they lived in, to the churches where they worshipped, and the pub where they gathered in the evening, always striving to hold on to a sense of home. Fergus was a little bit of Scotland transplanted to the other side of the world. People here formed pipe bands and curling clubs. They wore kilts and celebrated Hogmanay. They even had their own Highland games. Hello.
Hello.
I'm Jeremy.
Hello, Jeremy. Thanks for coming to my shop. I'm Heather.
You're
The
Heather.
owner of the shop. Yes, nice to meet you.
Nice Scottish name, eh?
Welcome.
So what do you sell in a Scottish shop?
Well, we sell all things Scottish. We sell all the sweets and the cakes and the drinks and the crisps and all the stories and all the connections.
Stories?
All the stories. People like to come and tell us their stories and their Scottish connections and all their memories from their past.
Got any
and-
deep-fried Mars bars?
Oh, no, I haven't. I do have the Mars bars.
Meat pies?
I do have meat pies. I have Scotch pies and bridie's and steak pies and
Haggis?
black pudding, haggis. Oh, yes, I've got the haggis and the sausage and the
God, I
good
didn't
stuff.
even know they still make
We've
camp
got
coffee.
the camp coffee and
People buy this stuff.
yes, they just love that we carry all of these products that they grew up with.
So your customers are mainly people who've moved here?
They are mainly
From
people that have
Scotland.
moved here, and the fact that there's a connection here to their past is fabulous. That seems to be the big draw.
Gosh, what fun.
Blast from the past, bring back all the memories from childhood.
The Scots who settled in Fergus wanted a better life than the one they were leaving behind. But in their new homeland, they clung tenaciously to the customs of the land of their birth. English-speaking former colonies like these are one of the Empire's most enduring legacies, a network of countries linked to Britain by tradition, family, and history. The growth of this successful community was a pretty peaceful affair. But in some colonial settlements, it was a very different story. Native peoples were forced off their land. Many were tricked into signing it away. Others had their populations devastated by famine and diseases introduced by settlers. The biggest land grab of all was still to come. What became known as the Scramble for Africa saw the great European powers carve up millions of square miles as they wrestled over the land and its peoples. British settlers started coming here to Kenya in the early 1900s. Then it was a vast, thinly populated region of mountains and forests, huge plains and wild animals. The settlers liked what they saw. West Africa was full of swamps and diseases and things, but here the land was fertile, the climate was glorious, like England on the very nicest kind of summer's day. But there was one problem. The best land was already occupied. Local tribes such as the Kikuyu were bribed or bullied into making way for the new arrivals. In return for 6 months' labor, they were allowed to become squatters and to grow crops on land that had once been theirs. It was an uneasy arrangement. Tension led to violence on both sides. Some Kikuyu villages witnessed dreadful scenes. One morning in the early 1900s, a young British lieutenant in the King's African Rifles received orders to find out what had become of a white settler. He described what he found. In the middle of the village, on the open ground, was a sight which horrified me. A naked white man had been pegged out on his back, mutilated and disemboweled, his body used as a latrine by all who passed by. Revenge was instant and it was savage. We burned all the huts, he said. We razed the banana plantations to the ground, and every soul was either shot or bayoneted. The English class system made sure different kinds of settlers ended up in different kinds of colonies. The toffs came to Kenya. No one without plenty of cash was allowed in. They proved themselves good at growing new crops like coffee, wheat and sugarcane, or tea. Surrounded by their estates, they built grand houses in the English style. A taste of Edwardian England in the so-called Dark Continent. Some stayed on after independence in the 1960s.
Jeremy, nice to meet you.
Very good
nice
to see
meet
you. Thank you for having us. Tony Seth Smith's grandparents came to Kenya in 1904. That's the first animal I've recognised today.
That's my uncle's first house.
It's a grass hut.
It's just a grass hut and some mud walls. The zebra skin on the wall probably stopped the draft going through a crack in it. And then he progressed to a rather smarter house made of corrugated iron, up on stilts to stop the white ants getting at the floorboards. Transport, there you are.
That's a huge oxen train, isn't it?
Trained oxen, 16 was generally a typical span of oxen.
16 oxen for one
16
cart.
oxen for the one cart. And then, of course, during the night, you'd have a little thorn enclosure which you kept the oxen in, and probably a lion would come round and roar upwind of it, and poof, all your oxen had gone, and the lions nailed two of them in the dark, you know. But it was, I suppose that was a part of the fun, wasn't it? You know, it was exciting. And
That's a great picture. This is your father, is
that's
it?
my father.
With a dead lion.
With a dead lion. You know, these lions, they didn't sit around like you see them in a park nowadays. The lions in those days knew how to look after themselves, and there wasn't a park.
Oh, but even the lions aren't what they were, eh?
No, no, everything's fallen by the wayside.
Do you think this policy of trying to attract enterprising people with a bit of money to invest, do you think it worked for this country?
I think it worked in the long term, because unlike today, where much of the developing world is developing as a result of aid and packages of money, the donor thing, there were no donors. The country was developed on the backs of the settlers, people like my father.